Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about part 12 of our tomato grow along, and I'm really just going to be talking about how we can encourage these tomatoes now to ripen as we are later in the season, and for most of us our frosts are looming this month. We have had quite a few earlier frosts this year when we've had the heater on in the polytunnel, and I'm sure for those of you who have had plants just outside, it may be that you've already taken yours inside. And with the wet weather, the blight has definitely taken hold for a lot of people as well. I do have a little bit of blossom end rot, and I also do have some grey mould, so we're going to have a look at that today. But first of all, what can we do to make sure that our tomatoes that we still have growing are going to ripen now? So the first thing is to keep removing the fruit as they do ripen. As we've talked about in previous videos, this can be at the point that they are blushing. We don't need to wait for them to completely ripen on the vine. Once they are at a halfway point, then the tomato has everything it needs in order to continue ripening. So by leaving it on the plant, all we're doing is making the plant have to support that fruit when it doesn't need to. So that would be the first thing that I would suggest doing. They are going to really appreciate some heat if you are able to offer that on the nights that are particularly colder at the moment. So if you do have a heater and you're able just to give them a little bit in order to try and support them, that would be really helpful. But I would still encourage you to open the doors during the days. We want still the ventilation as much as we do want the heat as well. So maybe you might find that you're shutting that door a little bit earlier. We tend to shut it around sort of 5 o'clock at the moment, and definitely want to shut it before it gets dark as well, and those temperatures definitely start reducing. Making sure that you have pruned the plants, and I always leave a few leaves on the top, and we've talked about this before, but you can completely remove the leaves. They aren't really doing anything for the plant now. So if you are finding they are very slow, then you can completely strip them so there are just the tomatoes remaining. That is the same with any new flowers that are being produced. We don't want the plant to be putting energy into those flowers, so we want to make sure that they're removed too. Reducing the watering can also really help, and this is because what we're going to do is stress the plants. By stressing the plants, we then allow them to think, oh, hang on, I need to make sure that I ripen these fruits in order to make sure that the seed is viable. So the plant's stress response is to ripen the fruit. So with the change in weather and it being a little bit colder, you probably have already reduced your watering anyway, but we can reduce it a little bit more. And we don't want the ground to get completely dry so it doesn't absorb any water. So do feel how wet the compost is around it, but we do want to just have it a little bit drier than it has been previously. So just at the point where we're thinking like it needs watering, leave it an additional day or two. We're probably watering about once or twice a week, depending on the temperatures. So I would now be leaving it to once a week to once a fortnight. And these tomatoes are only likely to be in the tunnel now for another sort of 4 to 6 weeks maximum, depending on what happens with the temperatures going forward. Some people do suggest that hanging bananas over your plants will help. Now, I wouldn't go out and buy bananas if you're not eating them anyway, but if you have a load of skins from bananas, then by all means hang them over the vines and see if the gas that releases does help those tomatoes to ripen. And then if all else fails, then bringing these tomatoes in as green tomatoes, and hopefully where they are already starting to blush just slightly and just starting to change colour, would be best. But bringing them inside and popping them in a windowsill or popping them in a brown paper bag with a banana at that point, you might as well, and allowing them to continue ripening from there is also a great idea. If you do still have the ability to keep them outside, then I would leave them outside. It's not something that you need to worry about them ripening very fast, and they will get there slowly. This year has definitely been a slower ripening. I felt like we haven't had many off of these at all, but actually when I came to make some more sauce, it's really surprising how much we had in the freezer. They're just taking longer, and I'm getting smaller baskets at a time but they are definitely ripening and producing. If you are desperate to plant something else following your tomatoes and you need the space, then removing them all as green tomatoes is definitely an option as well. You can then leave them and try and ripen them in the house, or there are recipes to be using green tomatoes, from slicing them and frying them to making chutneys and things like that as well. So there are always options. Don't just assume that they're going to go in the compost, because that's not the case. I have had blight outside, but not in the tunnel. And I will show you in a minute the grey mould that we have had that can actually look very similar to blight, but it doesn't progress in the same way. So the tomatoes that were outside, they have been stripped, the fruits have all been brought inside, and they have been composted. Blight is not something that lives on decaying matter. It needs live plants in order to live. So it is perfectly safe to put it in your compost bin, even if your compost bin does not get up to a high temperature like mine doesn't. So this plant here is the one suffering from grey mould, and you can see it looks very similar to blight in the fact that it's in the stem, but it is fuzzy. And then this tomato also has blossom end rot. So you can still eat tomatoes with blossom end rot, absolutely fine. You just cut off the bottom and let them continue to ripen. But you can also spot on the leaves that there's a little bit of dotting and a little bit of mould as well. So this plant does seem to be the only one that is suffering from it, and we don't have any blossom end rot as far as I'm aware on the other tomatoes. So I will be disposing of this one here, but the rest should be absolutely fine. And then what I also wanted to discuss was something called cat facing. So this is not the same as blossom end rot. This is something that often happens on larger varieties and beefsteak varieties. And here's another example that could be mistaken as the blossom end rot, but it's absolutely fine. It's completely normal and there is nothing wrong with them. You're just going to cut them off at the point of eating them. And it's just something that we don't see in our supermarket tomatoes because they wouldn't be seen as perfect. You can see there is very little leaves left on these tomatoes now, so there's plenty of ability for the sunlight to come and penetrate them, and just to continue keeping an eye out for any blight. I do have these flowers here that need to be removed, and you can just see at the back here that is some more grey mould rather than blight. So you can see how it looks very similar to blight on the leaves. And it's one reason why I'm really suggesting that when you think you might have blight, to not act too fast, because actually there are other things that look very similar, and it isn't worth losing all your plants and taking all of your fruit off in the green stage at this point if it isn't definitely blight. So I've harvested the rest, and now I've just got these ones here that I'm dealing with the grey mould. Grey mould can be composted if you have a hot compost bin, but mine doesn't get hot enough. It's just fallen off. So you can see that it's not able to support the fruit anymore. And it was actually ripening up nicely. I'm going to put these into our normal rubbish, or you could put them into your green bin if you have one of them. And that is going to be along with any of the leaves and the plant matter off of this particular plant. And then I will cut this one off. This one doesn't seem to be affected, so I'm just going to keep an eye on that one, and it will go in the basket with the rest. But the entirety of this stem and this tomato is going to go in the bin. I'm also going to remove the remaining leaves off of this plant because it has got another few fruits at the bottom that I want to try and allow to ripen now. And then I'm going to do that with the one beside it as well, because that seems to have a bit of grey mould. I think that actually both beside it do. And pop them in the bin as well. This is the garden pearl that we've also had growing this year, and you can see it's not looking overly healthy now. It has got a couple of flowers still coming on it, and I can't see any signs of blight or anything like that. But there are so few tomatoes left on it that I'm just going to harvest these and move this one out the way now for some other crops to be planted in here. When I remove my tomatoes, I do just cut them off at the stem at the bottom, but you could also pull them out. If you can put your foot either side of the tomatoes and just pull out the root and leave some of those smaller roots in there, then that will be beneficial and allow the roots to die back and continue feeding the soil as well. So any that are a little bit matted aren't likely to actually ripen now, but any that are shiny or have already started turning should be absolutely fine. And they got 2 chances. So you can see this one's a bit whiter. I'm not sure that one's likely to actually do very well. I think that might be the only ones I'm going to take off. So there's nothing wrong with this plant. It has just got old, so that one's now going to get cut up and popped into the compost. Once I can find my secateurs, I will take this stem right back down to the soil level or slightly below, just so it's not in the way for any next plantings. And then the other thing that we will do is also feed this soil before we plant anything else in there. I will do a video of different mediums and things that we can use to feed our soil in the next few days and weeks, so keep an eye out for that one if it's not something you've done before. And then this is the other determinate or bush variety that we've got growing in here. It's not doing too bad and there's some fruits hiding amongst the foliage, but what I am going to do is reduce this foliage down now. Previously I've been leaving it alone and just letting it get on with it, but because it is later in the season, we're just going to reduce it down and allow those fruits hopefully to have a last chance at ripening now. Any stems that are no longer holding fruit and aren't looking very healthy, like this one, I'm just going to remove. It's just old, there's nothing particularly wrong with it. I was bound to cut off one that had a bit of fruit on it. That is going to go in now to see if it will ripen with the rest. This one's completely bent, so although it has some fruit on as well, I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to cut this off. There we go. I'm just left with the skeleton of the plant now and the fruits that are on it. I'm going to cut this one off as it's blushing and take that one in as well. But the rest we're just going to leave like that. One good thing about doing this is if you have got plants that you want to plant underneath this now, there's enough light in order to do that. So it's a great way of continuing to plant a little bit sooner when you've still got those plants in place. So this is what we've harvested down here, and the plants, as you can see, are looking quite a bit more bare now, but they still have lots of green tomatoes left on them. These are the ones that I've reduced the foliage off of, these 3 here. And don't forget to wash your tools and your hands after cutting anything that's diseased, blight or anything like that off of them. If it's just older leaves that aren't looking overly healthy, like these ones up here, then that's not a problem at all. But if they are obviously actually got a virus or something, then it's really important to continue actually cleaning your hands and your tools between going from plant to plant.